Well, good day, everyone. It is the 10th of April, and welcome to your daily dose here at noontime. We are in the book of James. This day, we're going to be in James chapter 3, talking about one of the larger themes of the book of James, and that is wisdom. Just a little bit about it today, but before we do that, I want to encourage everybody in the chat, whether you're in Zoom or whether you're on YouTube Live, to make sure that you put in your announcements, your updates, all of those things that you need to do. Stick them in the chat, and we'll get them and we'll put them out on our flock note and in the various forms that we use. And I would encourage you, if you're not part of our flock note, I need your basically email and your phone number, and you can get all of the updates that we send out. Send out several usually during the week. Also, if you don't have a Faith Life account, we are on there and we post things there all the time as well. Typically the larger things, but Faith Life, and just go to faithlife.com and you can sign up and then search for Pinellas Park Church of Christ. You can follow us and see all of the things that we have going on. Everything we have going on nowadays is somewhat virtual. We're meeting in the Zoom room on Sunday mornings. If you want to be a part of our worship service this coming Lord's Day, and you are not, or you don't have the information to do that, just get in contact with me at Ed Benesh. That's EDB as in boy, ENESH at gmail.com. And I can send you the room ID number and passwords that will enable you to get into the room. Don't want to mention them here because Zoom is having a lot of trouble with people kind of coming in and bombing rooms and taking over just because, well, they can. It's kind of the modern version of prank calling people, I guess. But anyhow, just contact me and I can get that information to you. But let's go ahead and jump right into our lesson for today. Beginning with verse 13 of James chapter 3, James writes this: "Who is wise and understanding among you?" Now, you stop there and just kind of ask that question of ourselves. And it's an interesting question. Who is wise among us? And you think, well, is this just a question that he's asking to kind of get us to put people in categories, or to make an estimation of ourselves, or what? I think James is asking the question because he wants us to, number one, understand what it means to be wise, but certainly all of us need to have wise people in our lives. I mean, if I have struggles, and I will, then we're told that in the first chapter of the book of James. If I want to know how to practice my faith, put it into works, that's James chapter 2, then I need to be able to do that with some kind of wisdom. Need to be able to do that with some kind of wisdom. James is asking the question, who is wise and understanding among you? I think is a practical point. It's not just us kind of academically or in some higher way of putting each other in some sort of category as far as our mental ability goes. It's actually supposed to be a practical thing. That really is built up to this point from chapter 1, which, of course, if you go back to chapter 1, after he tells us to count it all joy when we fall into various trials, he tells us, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, right? So, he tells us from the very get-go of this book, not only will we have these struggles, but you need to seek the one who can give you wisdom. So now we're in chapter 3, verse 13, and he says, who is wise and understanding among you? Right? So it's not necessarily asking for the wisdom of God here. He's saying, who is wise among you? Well, hopefully there are people that we are around on a regular basis who are wise or who act in wise ways. But he goes on, he says, by his conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. So I think this kind of reveals the reason behind why James is asking. You want wise people in your life. How can you tell they're wise? Who is the wise person? Well, the wise person is going to let you know they're wise because they act in wise ways, right? He implies even the opposite here. The opposite of, the wise person who has wise conduct is going to be the person who doesn't act in meekness, but instead acts in prideful ways. And if we go on and read, that's essentially what he spells out for us. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. All right, so just a couple of things here. Number one. Number one, there are two different kinds of wisdom, right? There's the wisdom that the world imparts, and then there is the wisdom that is from above. So, who among you is wise? Let him show by his works the meekness of wisdom that comes from above. So, when you start to examine somebody's life, when you start to ask the question, okay, how can I tell who's wise here, or how can I tell what is a wise course of action to take? Well, then you can use these two standards of judgment. Number one, is it the wisdom of the world? Number two, is it the wisdom that is from above? If it's the wisdom of the world, then it's going to fall into this category where we can define it by certain things. Number one, bitter jealousy. Bitter jealousy. Now, this is kind of hard to see. A lot of people do a lot of things. Bitter jealousy is more of a motive that is in the heart. You don't always get to see it. You get to see the outpouring of it, but you don't necessarily see. People don't walk around with, "Hey, I'm bitterly jealous," on my shirt. That's just not something that people do. But it is a motive, and we don't sometimes get to see it. The next one is selfish ambition. Both of these kind of put the person who is seeking the wisdom, right, or manifesting the wisdom at the heart of why they are engaging in this behavior, because they are bitterly jealous. In other words, it has to do with their motive and how they compare to other people. And then selfish ambition also puts them in the focus. He says, do not boast or be false to the truth. And this is just kind of a different way of saying that this type of wisdom is hypocritical, right? It's boasting, but there's no genuine wisdom or fullness of understanding that lies behind the person's either motive or the way that they are acting in the world. He goes on to say, this is not the wisdom that comes from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic, right? And when he says unspiritual here, I believe that what James is telling us is that it doesn't help you in any way spiritually, right? It does not move us forward in some spiritual way, but rather is sensual. In other words, it's part of this world. When we think of our existence, we think that we do exist in this sensual world where we have senses and touch and taste and all of that, but we also are a spirit. And we exist in a spiritual sense. At the beginning, God made man, formed him from the dust of the earth, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. We will go on after this life to live as spiritual beings in a recreated body. But there's that spiritual side of us that lives on, for eternity. Well, the wisdom that is from below, the wisdom that is earthbound, it does not lend itself to that spiritual side of who we are. It's not concerned about that. It's also defined by being demonic. Now that's kind of interesting because, essentially, what do we know of demons? We are told that, demons believe and tremble. They are fully aware of, who God is, who Christ is. But we're told basically that they're unclean, spirits who wrangle and debate and essentially accuse, and they're part of all that goes against everything that is spiritual. So it is the anti-spiritual. So not only does it lack a spirituality, it works in demonic ways or against spirituality. So look at this, kind of trifecta of things that we have here. It's earthbound, right? Unspiritual, and anti-spiritual. It's not just bound to this earth. It has no spiritual quality, and anything that would even lend itself to a spiritual quality would be working against that spiritual quality. So this is a big way, a big thing that it says about wisdom. I mean, if we can't look at a type of wisdom that somebody manifests in their life and see in it something that takes in the fullness of how we are created, the fullness of who we are. In other words, if it doesn't pay homage to or does not lend itself to the fullness of our being, earthly and spiritual, then we can know that it is not a wisdom that comes from God. He goes on, verse 16, and he says, "For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder in every vile practice." Right? So where we have those, ill-fated motives, where we have the jealousy in our heart, where we have the pride and the selfish ambition, then we're also going to have, disorder in every vile practice. And you think about it for just a minute. If everybody is pursuing their own way, that kind of sounds like the period of the kings, or not kings, the judges, period of the judges. Each man did what was right in his own sight, right? Organized time, great time for God's people? No. It was a chaos. And rivalry and fighting and ruin and destruction were the norm back in the period of, the judges. I mean, there's some interesting stories in the period of the judges, but it is not a time where, people would say, you know what, I wish I'd lived in the period of the judges. It's kind of like the Dark Ages that we're going to talk about, in later history. But this is the kind of the Dark Ages of the biblical world. The period of the judges was just kind of a chaos. But that's what you get when you embrace the wisdom of the world that is earthly, lacking any spiritual focus, and working actually against spiritual things. But then you look at the other side, the other type of wisdom, and that is the wisdom that is from above, right? And when we say from above, it's kind of an accommodative language. Heaven is always spoke of as from above, and I think it's not just simply a spatial reference. In other words, you can't go high enough and end up finding that place called heaven where God dwells. It's just kind of the idea that he is above us. He is the authority over us. So when we see that this wisdom from above, it's not a literal above, even though it's kind of presented that way, and we do have heavens that are, meaning atmosphere above us. It's more about his authority and more about his, power, beginning with creation and working the way forward. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. So do we see these things in our life? When we talk about purity, I think that's the opposite of what he talks about in the worldly wisdom. Worldly wisdom is tainted by having the motive of bitter jealousy and selfish ambition. When it comes to wisdom that is from above, it has a motive that is pure. Pure in what way? Well, pure in that it is peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, and then it ends up producing good fruits that are impartial and sincere. Right? So all of that kind of builds upon the idea that it is first pure. Right? If it's not first pure, if it doesn't come from a pure motive, then we're going to have serious problems. You can have, what appears to be the greatest understanding of things in this world, and if you're offering that understanding and that action with an impure motive, then it's just going to cause problems, right? But if you go through and you look at each one of these words, and we're not going to go through every single one of them, but you can see that these are things that should define, the wisdom that we embrace. Does the wisdom that we embrace and the actions of wisdom, because that's what we're talking about, by his conduct, verse 13, by his conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. So, does our conduct afford itself to wisdom that is from above? Well, is our motive pure in it? Am I doing it for right reasons? Right? You can never seek righteous things with an unrighteous motive. It just doesn't work that way. So, do I have a pure motive? And then from that pure motive, do I produce peace with my wisdom? Am I gentle? And I think this is a big one. A lot of folks kind of miss this one because we want to offer people, especially when it comes to like say evangelism, we want to offer people a wisdom that we have by years of Bible study and things like that. But then we beat people up with the gospel at times, and we just need to be cautious that we're not starting with, well, these are our differences, and these are the things that we focus on, and this is where you're wrong, and this is where I'm right. That just kind of comes off as arrogant. It's certainly not, gentle. Open to reason. Open to reason. This is a good one too, and it's very, very interesting. If you go back and you look at the original, if you go back and look at the original language, and King James says is easily to be entreated, but literally, it means good for persuasion, right? Or easily compliant is what it means. So the ESV here, I think, kind of confuses it a little bit when it uses the language that it does, and I think that's a rare thing. I love the ESV, and I think it reads really, really well. But open to reason doesn't necessarily capture the idea. It's really more about how wisdom that is pure and peaceable and gentle will also be more persuasive, right? If you want to persuade folks about the truth of some wise point or some wise action that you're taking, then it's got to be pure and peaceable and gentle, full of mercy and good fruits, right? You win more people by being merciful. And of course, mercy is, forgiving when people don't really deserve that, right? Good fruits, impartial and sincere. Doesn't matter, who the person is. Our motive shouldn't change. Our wisdom shouldn't change. Our actions based on wisdom should, not change. So James here presents us this picture of wisdom that allows us to really discern between, okay, what is wise in the fullest sense, and then, what is that wisdom that, the world promotes. Because make no mistake about it, the wisdom that's from above is the wisdom that we want to embrace. But the wisdom of the world, is something that's going to lead us to places that perhaps we don't always want to go. Disorder, vile practice, selfish ambition, jealousy, so on and so forth. James, the wisdom book of the New Testament, talks an awful lot about wisdom. But this particular section, after he already told us in chapter 1 that if you lack wisdom, seek it and God will give it to you, here tells us, okay, how we can sort of parse out that we are embracing the right type of, wisdom, because there are different types. Anyhow, I just thought I would share that a little bit with you. Thought we could run through the context of James here. It is Friday. It is the Friday before, Easter weekend. A lot of folks celebrate this as a Good Friday, and certainly want to encourage you to focus on spiritual things, and especially focus on the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And hopefully you'll be celebrating that this weekend, you and your family and loved ones. But I appreciate everybody coming out today. Appreciate you being a part of this program and taking time out of your busy day to sit and study just a few verses of the Bible. We'll pick up next week on Monday at the same time, noon. And we'll continue on with our look at the book of James. But I appreciate you coming out and being a part of this daily dose. Thank you.